Hey Calvary Church, it's Chris here, your St. Charles campus pastor, and I am joined by...
Dan, you're a Mid-Rivers campus pastor.
And we have kicked Brad out of the studio today. He is in Disney vacationing, and we were just informed he rode the Ratatouille ride just moments ago, so...
Yeah, I hope they're having a great time, him and his wife and kids, and getting some rest. So He's certainly put in his work. What's that phrase that you say? Earned his corn? Is that?
Yeah, Brad earned his corn, and now he's on vacation.
What do you do with your corn when you're on vacation? What happens next?
I'm not sure. You probably just store it away and cherish it and stop working so hard.
Well, enjoy your corn, Brad. But we're talking about work in church, so go for it.
And he's missing the deep dive, so I'm sure the Disney's okay, but we get to be here with our people.
We know where his heart's at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're talking about just do something, which is kind of what we had in our sermon series on what do I do with my life. And in this series, we're kind of hitting on Ecclesiastes verse like once every sermon, and then we're kind of expanding in some other like topical and passage type things. But really we're always kind of aiming at this question of what do I do with my life? And so we've kind of talked about which path do you choose? And as you walk along that path, who's with you? And in your work and your vocation is a huge part of that path. And how is that worship? How is that meaningful? How do you find direction? And then for this Sunday, we really talked about, how do we escape the paralysis of analysis? Like, how do we actually enter in to the thing and the work and the direction itself? How do we confidently do something when we don't have all the answers? Like when we don't have the entire chart plotted, when we don't have the entire roadmap of our life, and there's uncertainty and there's flexibility and there's circumstance and there's pivoting that happens in life stages. Like, how do we get to the place where we can, within the framework, or love God, love people, make disciples, do the things, the mattering things in front of us, even if we don't have every particular or circumstance figured out. So that's kind of where we live. So I'm just going to kick it to Dan just for a minute or two. How did, in what happened here at Mid-Rivers campus and what you guys dove into, what are some kind of cool things you landed on in kind of this just do something theme?
Yeah, I think for me and conversations I've had since Sunday, I guess I think the thing that I would say we kind of experienced together was a sense of being empowered as the people of God to be agents of Jesus' kingdom. It's not just a nice idea that we're part of His kingdom. It's not just a fallback thing. Well, if nothing else works out, at least I'm a believer in Jesus' kingdom. In Scripture, the idea of being part of that kingdom is an idea that's filled with agency and a degree of expectation. So, like today, I guess what I'm processing and thinking through a little bit further would be like in the really practical parts of life where you really do have, maybe it's not choices to make, because we talked about that. Which way do I go? But maybe like discerning choices, the kinds that like if I take this road, this path, I'm going to be on it for a while. I don't know if I'm pretty certain you've gone canoeing and kayaking and all of that. And sometimes you're on a river, and with your best read of the river, you kind of pick a lane, right? You pick a side of the river, or maybe it splits, and you try to read that and go the right direction. But there's some commitment in that. Yeah. And there is this sense of like you're going to end up probably having difficulty either way. You're going to have whitewater one way or trees down the other, whatever. But you got to go with that. And the thing we can't do, I think, and I this would be the negative side, I think we kind of landed on, we just can't sit still waiting for the right conditions.
Right.
That's the one thing we are not afforded. I think part of that has to do with the nature of life. Part of that has to do with our call and the presence of God. And part of it has to do with the nature of our own hearts. Because I think sometimes we talk ourselves out of doing something in the name of wanting to do the right thing. And that has pretty good consequences, because if we're not choosing to love God and love neighbor now, like doing it later, it's just a bit of a myth that I'm going to do those things later. Well, so
yeah, I really like how you put that. That is a myth, right? Like if we're waiting for the circumstances to be perfect, if we're waiting just for the weather to change or to get some miraculous sign, like that day's probably never going to come. Like in the broken world in which we live, we actually are called to do the mattering things, even when the circumstances and situations aren't ideal. And actually, we could probably say that's when the gospel and the transformed people of God shine brightest, is because in the world that's experiencing the curse, like there's water of life being offered, like in the desert. So let me ask you this. What is, in your estimation, what are like some of the biggest, or maybe just name one of the biggest fears we have when it comes to like just walking into something that God has for us? Like what paralyzes us? What keeps us from doing the things, the mattering things?
Well, I do think sometimes we don't want to do those things. Like at our core, that sometimes what does Jesus say to Peter at the end of the Gospel of John? Say, when you were old, someone will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Henri now, and we've been reading that together internally, and his third chapter in his book, In the Name of Jesus, or third unit, it talks about being led where we don't want to go. And I guess on the surface that sounds bad, that maybe we don't really want the mattering things, but I also think there's some honesty in that. Like that's one of the tensions in our heart. Sometimes it requires courage. Most of the time it requires us wanting what God wants more than what we want. And so practically speaking, that's really hard to say how that might play out in someone's life, but it might look like having a less than ideal work situation and still putting in a full day's worth of work all day, every day, even if you're working from home and no one's really checking in. Or maybe it's more a family situation, like families who have kids with particular challenges are kind of near and dear to my heart. And, some days are harder than they should be because of those challenges. But I think a major question is this the mattering thing that God has for me? Like, is this tantrum that's in front of me right now just the bane of my existence, or is this an opportunity to do something with the love and the grace and the joy that God's given? And that second one is hard. That's hard to do when you're getting screamed at, yelled at. I would imagine there's a lot of people who could listen who have, whether they're teenagers or young adults, who like part of the issue is they don't want much to do with faith right now. Part of the issue is their own decision making. Because this question, what do I do with my life, gets asked a lot. But I think the world's really consistent answer is don't do the wrong thing right now. And so like I think parents are in a really interesting place, especially parents who maybe are a little older and from a generation where just do something made a lot more sense. And so now they're trying to coach and they're trying to mentor and they're trying to encourage faith, and the world's changed and shifted and it's just hard. But those mattering things, like we either invest in the business that God has given us or we don't. Like we looked at the parable of the not the talents, that's in Matthew 25, but the parable of the minas. So very similar. I think Jesus told the same kinds of stories multiple times, but this one in Luke stuck. And one thing's very clear is the only outcome we really can't get to is blaming the king or blaming the business. And so loving God, loving others is not easy work, but it is ours to do.
Man, that's really good stuff. And I think there is, to what you were talking about, there is a big fear of a misstep. Like I've seen this play out a ton in my generation. We went from wanting to do everything with little wisdom about if it was actually helpful or not, to a place of if we think we might make a misstep, like it's better just not to do it altogether.
Yeah.
Which I think is an unhealthy shift to the opposite side of the pendulum.
Yeah.
And toxic charity does exist. Helping that is actually hurting when you're well-intentioned but unwise does exist.
Yeah.
But if we're waiting for our decision-making to be perfect this side of glory before we take the first step, we're going to be waiting until we die. I mean, and so there, something in that, though, is actually a deep-seated pride that is a false humility.
Yeah.
That says my decisions and the cards I play and the path I take is actually the most powerful thing, where in reality, take the first couple steps, you may misstep.
Yeah.
You may trip on a log. You may stub your toe on a rock. But like God's grace and mercy and his plans and his will and his sovereignty is going to reign in your life even when you're an idiot.
Probably especially when you're an idiot, you know, like I do think that's important. Like whose story are we in? Is God in my story or am I in his?
Yeah.
And if I'm in his, then I'm going to do what I can with what he's given me. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants to look back over a period of their life or a stretch of time and say, oh, I shouldn't have been involved with that, or my heart's really changed. But Reggie Joyner, he's with the Orange Group. He said something back around the time of the stay-at-home part of pandemic that's really stuck with me. He talked about changing our minds, and coming to new places of understanding is kind of one of the gifts in life, and that's not something to be embarrassed or ashamed of. So let's take your what I'm thinking right now is in the world of like the helping when it hurts or toxic charity. Like it's true, we have learned a lot about what benevolence can be and should be, but if we use what's gone wrong for reasons to not be benevolent and just get wrapped up in entertaining ourselves, like are we really making a choice for the better? Or is the braver thing to do to take the wisdom that's been learned and do the harder thing and figure out how to help? One thing that's really cool locally, and it's not faith-based, but a number of years ago, our St. Charles Community Council went after a program called Coordinated Entry, because there are so many organizations that want to help homeless or near homeless persons in the area, but to coordinate all of that really takes a lot of effort. Is it a perfect system? No, but they've been trying to apply what is known as wisdom in the benevolence world and in the nonprofit sector to bring people together, to really support people in need, but also to do it with a system of care that maybe moves out of, or away from homelessness and into solution kind of focused stuff that's very partnership based and very empowering for the people involved. And at least as I understand it. So I think we have a lot to learn in the church. But
so we've talked a lot about circumstance. We've talked about our own competencies and the climate around us and how these things can paralyze us if we let them.
Yes.
Let's talk about superstition a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I do think also we fall into the trap of not just things have to be perfect, but I also need a miraculous sign. Almost like I need the burning bush or I need the massive star like the wise men get. It seems oftentimes instead of just saying, love God, love people, make disciples, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, Colossians 4, instead of that, it's more of, okay, I need an extraordinary call. I need a clear pathway.
Yeah.
I need something so blatantly obvious that I just absolutely know God is in it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll wait for that forever.
Yeah.
So what do you think that is? How do you think that shapes and impacts us? Because I do think if circumstance is a big bucket of things that paralyze us, I also think sometimes, like, I mentioned on Sunday, like baseball players. are
man.
extremely superstitious.
Very.
Like if you go 4 for 4, if you throw a one hitter,
100%.
you're going to eat the same things, dress in the same things.
I'm so sorry for that noise.
This is what happens when we don't have Brad. We're like threatening to break the set.
Well, he's talking about baseball. I mean, I had to do
you're
the.
getting excited.
That's right. 2011 World Series only let the tips of my toes touch the ground.
Oh my gosh.
With my left leg in the air, and the Cardinals won. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So like, but and we make fun of that. We probably make fun of a variety of superstitions.
Yeah.
Sometimes we might laugh at like people who base their whole lives around a horoscope. We're like,
Sure.
okay, that's probably not wise.
Yeah.
But we can fall into those same trappings. So I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah. I think that's actually a wonderful point. Okay, so in superstition, if I'm hearing you right, that superstition is I can't really do the best things unless I get a clear sign, call, trajectory, sense, vision, dream, ...
Yeah. It's looking for supernatural causation in everything.
Yeah.
Where, whether it goes good or bad, supernatural causation.
Yeah.
I spilled my coffee, God is judging me.
Yeah. Or devil's haunting me today. And yeah.
Or like, that thing went well. That was absolutely God's blessing.
Yeah.
Which it may be. But also you may just be enjoying a sin that later on the line is going to reap like horrible consequences. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something. I think that when it comes to superstition, I actually kind of I feel like there's something deep down that I would describe as either a deep misunderstanding of who we are as people, as God sees it, and potentially a deep misunderstanding of how God intends to work in our lives. Can God speak? Yes, but it's kind of like Okay, so if you're a hunter, you want to go into the woods and put yourself in a position to hear a turkey. Mm-hmm. It was just turkey season.
Okay,
and you kind of do the game. But if the turkey's not there, like you keep working and keep moving. You don't just sit and wait all day for just any turkey. I found this out the first time I went turkey hunting. I did it wrong.
You were like stagnant.
Sat all day.
Sat on the same acre.
Same place. Like Danny. Less than that. Same block.
Okay.
The whole time. Okay. So. And since then, I've kind of learned like part of the goal in turkey hunting is to put yourself in a position to hear that, call of the turkey and be involved. I think like what God gives us, I think that if we put ourselves in a position where there's a difference between being patient and waiting on God and being stubborn to the point we're not doing anything because we just don't think God's given us enough in front of us right now.
Yeah.
And that's the line, I think a patient person who's waiting on God is still going to find productive ways to love God, love neighbor. They're not gonna refuse to act. Yeah. The person who's kind of bordering on the superstitious is suggesting to themselves and sometimes even to others that, well, what I'm doing doesn't matter because God's going to call me to something else, or I need something big. Jesus said something really interesting to the Pharisees of his day, and love to hear if you think it applies. But he said at one point, "Woe to you who say to your father or mother, whatever help you would have received from me is Corban, a gift devoted to God," who like basically their mother and father in front of them was in need. But they would say, this money, this is for God, and I can't give it to you because it's for God. Almost as if that's currying favor. I'm investing in the godly stuff, and I'm ignoring my parents right in front of me. And Jesus said, like, you're ignoring the fourth commandment, or is it the fourth or fifth of God, like to honor your father and mother. Yeah. In order to do this other religious thing. And I think the subtext is this one makes you feel good. Yeah. This one is what God wants you to be about. Yeah. I think we do that a lot. Yeah. Or at least we're tempted to it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point is, I do agree with you. Like in that text, it's kind of claiming a pseudo holiness that doesn't really exist. It's like, I'm saving this for the house of God. How dare you question how I use it?
Yep.
Well, the person in front of you who you should be loving starves, right? Like another one of the woe to use is like you're tithing mint and dill, these very valuable things, and like the people around you are not cared for. So yeah, I do think it's almost ironic to say this, but it's like sometimes there is an over spiritualization of the ordinary, highly spiritual callings that God gives us in everyday life.
Yeah.
It's like to do the ordinary, mundane, overlooked things faithfully for God, the mattering things, like to change the diaper or like whatever it is. We just had Mother's Day, right? That's one of the things I brought up is like 90% of what our moms do that is so precious to us are like very invisible, unseen things that just mean the world. Yeah. But only so little is like seen or appreciated or gets the celebration. Yeah. So I know it's ironic to say that, but it's like, man, we'll attempt in our false humility to over spiritualize these practices that are seen by others, like the Pharisees praying in the street. And we will neglect the ordinary, invisible things that deeply matter. And I would argue the things that echo into eternity, even if they don't get the applause now.
Yeah. Yeah, the people who really inspire and impress me are those who can do intentionally devoted things and everyday, very mundane things, and hold those not in tension with each other, but very close to each other. Yeah. The family who can sit down and have a time of prayer or devotion and hear each other at the dinner table and be kind. I think the ones that scare me are probably the ones who do the spiritual thing and think that makes it all good enough and then doesn't do the everyday things of hearing, and of listening and talking and sharing and being emotionally present and stuff like that. Yeah. Best time in my life, when I look back, I had I was in a real nincompoop, I think is the word. Okay. From like...
Dunderhead?
Dunderhead. That's a good word. So especially after college, I had the opportunity to get a 4-year degree. Thanks, Mom and Dad. That was wonderful. And after that, I floundered. I didn't hold a job for more than... There's like a 3-year span where I didn't hold a job for very long. I kept trying new things. It wasn't going well. And I got kind of to this bottom place of my existence. Mm-hmm. I felt like I had a quarter-life crisis. And it became like, I need to just do something. Yeah. And it was actually a really sweet place to be. So at first, with Jackson Brothers Vending... Shout out. I don't think you're all are in business anymore, but y'all were wonderful. I got to stock vending machines and I got to commit to just doing something. And then shout out to Willott Road Christian Academy, also no longer working. I hope that's not a theme. But I got to work as a PE teacher. Thank you, Mrs. Bixler. And that was really, really cool. And from then stuff started making sense, but it felt like it got me prepared for this moment when I chose to go back to seminary. I wasn't in ministry at that point. I was just at my church. Yeah. Deciding to do something. In fact, what I thought should have been my first ministry opportunity didn't materialize. Yeah. But rather than use that as an excuse to eject, long story short, I felt like my call in that time, Mandy and I believed our call was to not make things about us at the church we were at, but to be peaceful. Yeah. And it was really cool. We wound up with a tremendous ministry, wound up in seminary, wound up working for that church later in a much healthier part of my life. Yeah. But my favorite role was right before that. I went to seminary, I had to leave the school, and I went to go work at the YMCA, St. Charles County Family YMCA. Mm-hmm. Dude, what good people. And I ended up, my job consisted mostly of folding towels and spraying off workout equipment. Okay. The highlight of that job is my 80-something-year-old grandma came in and I got to physically train her, to use weight machines. That was dope.
Physical trainer Dan.
It was great. I still fold towels the same way. Okay. But that once I just accepted that whatever opportunity was going to be there was God was responsible for. Yeah. Man, I had some of the best conversations. In terms of faith conversations, that was some of my favorite moments. Yeah. To be honest, I probably had more openness to what the gospel story is there than or maybe it's just different than sometimes I do in the church. Like sometimes in the church, I feel like I'm having to peel back layers of tradition to talk about the gospel. And there, I was just folding the towel and like people to ask about stuff, and we'd talk about life and everything. Anyway, was it glorious? No. Was it special? Yes. But it definitely for me was a just do something window of time. So.
Yeah, I would push back. I think I actually disagree with you. I think it actually was glorious. Like, I think our definitions of greatness and glory have to like be redefined.
I accept that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So here's where we'll land. I think the irony that your story just shows so well is that in the paralysis of analysis or our own anxiety or our own fears, not doing the mattering things, like not just doing something, will actually lead to us not being able to do the mattering thing we have visions of grandeur about. Like the wise men, they get the star in the sky, the supernatural event. They get a sign, like a physical sign to follow. But guess what? They had 40 years or whatever of studying astronomy charts, like over in dimly lit wee hours of the night before they could recognize the extraordinary thing of the story that God was going to have them do.
That's good.
Now, in the canon, in Scripture, we don't get that work, like in writing. That's the invisible work. They just did something. Like they did the scholarly work necessary, and it leads to this 5% of visible work that is actually this massive thing that's celebrated. But they would have never got there without the invisible just doing something of the mattering things for the 40 years prior.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I don't want our local church, Calvary Church, like that's what I never would want us to lose, is that in the fear that what we're doing is not fast or famous or extraordinary, we don't do the things that God actually might use later on to actually have that like 1% of extraordinary, like that moment where everything clicks. Like I don't want us to miss out on that.
It's a good word.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Go do the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just do it. All right. So that's going to be a wrap for this deep dive. And next deep dive, we promise that Brad will be back in full force to lead the ship and not break the equipment of the broadcast room. But we're so grateful just to be with you, to sit with you. And hopefully some of the stuff we said was encouraging and can help build you guys up. We love you guys. And this is just kind of our sign off. So we'll see you at Calvary Church.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive, a Calvary Church Media Productions podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.